In a world where trust is rare and honesty often goes unnoticed, a young black boy made a choice that would ripple through the lives of thousands. He didn't have money. He didn't have power. What he had was integrity. At just 12 years old, Jalen lived in a neighborhood most millionaires avoided. Cracked sidewalks. Flickering streetlights. A place forgotten by the city and dismissed by the rich. But one afternoon, fate handed him a test, a wallet overflowing with cash, belonging to a man who wouldn't even look twice at someone like him. What happened next stunned an entire city. It broke barriers. It rewrote a wealthy man's heart. And it reminded the world that character knows no color, and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. This is the true story of a boy who returned what wasn't his, and gained something no one ever expected: a family, a future, and the power to change everything. Jalen Carter lived in the kind of neighborhood most people drove past without looking twice. Cracked sidewalks stretched beside rows of aging buildings where the paint peeled like old memories. The smell of exhaust and fried food hung in the air, and the hum of broken streetlights buzzed long after the sun had set. Kids played ball with duct-taped sneakers, dogs barked from behind rusted gates, and sirens were more common than ice cream trucks. At 12 years old, Jalen had already learned the art of keeping his head down and his spirit up. His world was small, just a few blocks between school and home, but within those limits, he carried a heart too big for the space he was given. He wasn't the loudest in class, nor the fastest on the playground. But he listened, he helped, and he dreamed. Jalen's home was a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building that had once been a proud place for working families. Now, it wore the exhaustion of long nights and broken promises. The stairs creaked under every step, the walls held the echoes of arguments and lullabies, and the heater only worked when it didn't need to. His mother, Tamika, worked 2 jobs, days at a nursing home and nights cleaning office buildings in the part of town where people had lawns, not locks on their gates. Her hands were rough from chemicals and scrubbing, but her touch on Jalen's back when she kissed him goodnight was still the softest thing he knew. Jalen had a little sister, Maya, who was 6 and believed he could fix anything. Her toys, her broken barrettes, even the sadness in her eyes when kids made fun of her hand-me-down clothes. Jalen was her protector, her best friend, and the one who made dinner on nights when their mom was too tired to stand. Despite everything, Jalen loved to learn. Science fascinated him, the way things worked, the way they broke, and how they could be fixed. At school, he would sit in the library during recess flipping through books on circuits and robotics, his eyes lighting up as if the pages were made of stars. But in a school where the Wi-Fi barely worked and the textbooks were years out of date, there were limits to what a curious mind could reach. He built things from junk. Old remote controls, bits of copper wire, broken fans, he'd dig them out of trash bins and turn them into something new. In his closet, he kept a shoebox labeled "Inventor's Box," full of parts and dreams he couldn't yet name. He once made a mini radio from a cereal box and a busted Bluetooth speaker. It only picked up static and one gospel station, but to him, it was proof that possibility lived in his hands. People in the neighborhood knew Jalen as the quiet one who always helped carry groceries, fixed broken bike chains, and never talked back. Adults said he was raised right. Kids said he was different. Sometimes that meant they respected him. Other times, it meant he was alone. He had never known his father. All he had were stories, fragments told in hushed tones late at night when Tamika thought he was asleep. A man who had once loved deeply, worked honestly, and got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. His absence was a hole Jalen had stopped trying to fill. Instead, he poured himself into what he could control: his actions, his words, and the way he treated others. He understood, more than most boys his age, what it meant to go without. No birthday parties, no vacations, no game consoles. But he never complained. He knew how hard his mother worked. He knew how much she gave up. Every dollar was stretched, every meal made to last. And still, every Sunday morning, they sat together and said grace, not for what they had, but for what they still believed was coming. Jalen wanted to go to college. Not just to leave the neighborhood, but to return one day and build something better. He dreamed of designing energy-efficient housing, fixing the power grid, or building robotics that could help the elderly like the ones his mom cared for. He didn't just want to escape, he wanted to repair. He didn't talk about these dreams often. Not because he was ashamed, but because he knew how easily dreams could be dismissed when spoken from the wrong zip code. Instead, he carried them like a secret flame, protecting it from the wind of cynicism that blew through the streets like smoke. Every afternoon, as he walked home from school, he passed the same boarded-up store, the same graffitied alley, the same potholes that no one came to fill. But with every step, he imagined something different. A cleaner street. A robotics lab. A home where the heat always worked and the lights never flickered. He didn't know it yet, but one of those ordinary walks, those quiet, unseen moments, was about to become the turning point of his life. It was a Friday afternoon, and the air held that peculiar stillness that comes just before the weekend begins, when kids rush home with half-finished homework and parents brace for 2 more days of scraping by. Jalen was walking the same path he always did, tracing the familiar sidewalks with quiet steps, his backpack slightly fraying at the straps. The sun had dipped low, casting golden shadows over the street corners, when something unusual caught his eye. At the edge of a bus stop bench, just beneath the green metal armrest, was a brown leather wallet. It wasn't the kind of wallet you'd expect to find in a place where people had little to spare. This one looked expensive, smooth leather, perfectly stitched edges, no scratches, no wear. Out of place, like a diamond in a dustpan. Jalen slowed, then stopped. He looked around. The bench was empty. No one was nearby. Just the shuffle of cars on the main road and a light breeze pulling litter through the gutters. He picked it up, cautiously, half expecting someone to call out or run back. But no one came. The wallet was thick, much thicker than anything he'd ever seen. His fingers, slightly trembling, opened it slowly. Inside were several crisp $100 bills, stacked neatly in a compartment that barely held them all. Credit cards with heavy names, black, platinum, embossed with gold letters. There was a driver's license too, slipped into a clear pocket. The name read Charles E. Whitmore, with an address in the wealthy part of town and a photo of a man in a tailored suit, smiling like someone who had never worried about a late bill or an empty fridge. Jalen's heart beat faster. The amount of money in that wallet was more than his mother made in a month. Maybe even 2. For a moment, everything paused. The noise of the world faded, and all he could hear was the pounding of his own conscience. He thought of the rent notice stuck to their apartment door just 3 days ago, the one his mother had peeled off before Maya could see it. He thought of the empty refrigerator and the power bill folded under a stack of unopened mail. He thought of the cracked soles of his sneakers and the way his mom smiled through exhaustion when he offered to eat less so Maya could have more. This wallet could change things. It could solve problems. Just 1 or 2 bills taken, maybe that would go unnoticed. No one would know. He hadn't stolen it. He just found it. And didn't people say that God helped those who helped themselves? But something deeper pushed against those thoughts. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't fear. It was a quiet certainty, built from years of watching his mother work double shifts without cutting corners. From the lessons he'd learned not through lectures, but by example. Tamika Carter never lied, even when telling the truth cost her. She never stole, even when she had less than she needed. And Jalen, raised in that same light, knew what he had to do. Still, returning it wouldn't be easy. He couldn't just drop it off at a police station. People in his neighborhood didn't always trust the police, and even if he did, who was to say the wallet would actually make it back to the man? And if someone saw him with it, walking through the wrong part of town, what would they think? A black boy with a rich man's wallet, that didn't look good in any city. But he wasn't going to keep it. He flipped the license over again and studied the address. He recognized the zip code. It was the one printed on every box of gourmet food his mom delivered when she cleaned houses. The part of town with names like Willow Estates and Highland Meadows. Where lawns were trimmed like magazine covers and security cameras blinked from every gate. Jalen knew he would need to go there himself. It was risky. A long walk, unfamiliar streets, and eyes that might not see a boy trying to do the right thing, but instead see a threat. Still, he couldn't let it go. He couldn't drop the wallet into a mailbox and hope. He wanted to see it returned. Not for thanks. Not for reward. But because something inside him couldn't sit still until he had done what was right. That night, he hid the wallet under his bed, wrapped in one of his old t-shirts. He didn't tell his mom. He didn't tell anyone. He lay awake thinking about the man whose name was stamped on that driver's license. A man who probably hadn't even noticed yet that it was missing. A man who could lose a wallet and not panic. A man who might never imagine that someone from Jalen's side of the city would be the one to bring it back. Jalen didn't know what to expect. But he knew what he had to do. The journey to Willow Estates felt like stepping into a different country, not just a different neighborhood. The cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights faded behind as the roads widened and the trees thickened, lining perfectly paved streets like guardians of another world. There were no liquor stores on corners, no graffiti on walls, no sirens echoing in the distance. Instead, there were wide, gated driveways, mailboxes made of polished stone, and security signs that warned without saying a word. The air even smelled different, cleaner, quieter, almost rehearsed. Sprinklers whispered across flawless lawns, and gardeners moved like ghosts trimming hedges shaped like swans and spirals. The houses weren't houses, they were estates. Marble columns, 3-car garages, fountains out front. It was wealth that didn't just speak, it roared. The address on the license led to the far end of a cul-de-sac, where the largest home sat behind tall black gates. The Whitmore residence wasn't just big, it was deliberate. Every brick, every arch, every pane of glass had been placed with intention. The kind of home built not for shelter, but for status. A winding driveway circled a stone fountain carved with lions. Ivy curled up one side of the mansion like nature itself had been trained to grow elegantly. Security cameras blinked silently from every corner, and an intercom sat like a silent judge beside the gate. It was a place meant to keep people out, especially people who didn't belong. Jalen knew how he might look to the eyes watching from behind those cameras. His clothes weren't pressed. His shoes were worn. His skin and his silence would raise questions before he even said a word. In neighborhoods like this, suspicion came before curiosity. Fear came before fairness. But none of that changed his purpose. His grip tightened on the wrapped wallet tucked in his jacket. He had walked all this way, not to be seen or questioned, but to return something that didn't belong to him. That truth, as plain and quiet as it was, held power. Behind the gates, the front door of the mansion was glass and brass, and beside it sat towering windows that reflected the trees and the sky more than they revealed what was inside. There were no dogs barking. No music playing. Just the soft rustle of trees and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. The longer one stood in a place like that, the more aware they became of how much they didn't fit. In a world of tailored hedges and gleaming driveways, even a good intention could be mistaken for something else. There were stories, too many of them, about boys like Jalen, who had tried to do the right thing in the wrong place and paid a price for it. But Jalen wasn't thinking about what could go wrong. He was thinking about what it meant to follow through. About his mother, who taught him to walk with dignity no matter where his feet landed. About Maya, who thought her big brother could fix the world. And about himself, the boy who believed that choices, even small ones, made ripples bigger than anyone could see. He had no plan for what would happen next. No expectation of gratitude or reward. Just a hope, fragile and clear, that doing right still mattered. That returning what wasn't his, even to a man who lived behind gates and marble columns, was still a thing of value. The world on this side of town was built on protection, alarm systems, gates, passwords. It was a world that believed in guarding what it had. But Jalen came not to take, but to return. And sometimes, in a world used to suspicion, that kind of honesty was the most disruptive thing of all. Somewhere inside that mansion, a man named Charles Whitmore likely carried on with his day unaware of the wallet he had lost. Unaware of the quiet journey being made to correct a mistake he hadn't yet discovered. Unaware that a boy from a zip code most people avoided was about to knock on his gate, not for charity, not for praise, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And beyond that gate stood a moment waiting to unfold. One that would not just return a wallet, but reveal a character. One that would blur the hard lines between wealth and poverty, stranger and neighbor, suspicion and trust. Jalen's walk to the mansion wasn't just a physical journey. It was a step across boundaries, economic, racial, social, that too often go unchallenged. And with every step he took, he quietly redefined what courage looked like in a world that expected so little from boys like him. What waited on the other side of that gate was more than just a doorbell and a fancy entrance. It was a test of assumptions. And neither Jalen nor the man inside had any idea just how much would change because of a choice made at a bus stop, and the strength it took to follow that choice all the way to a stranger's doorstep. The meeting between Jalen and Charles Whitmore began with distance. Not just physical space, but the invisible layers of difference that exist between people who come from separate worlds. Age, race, wealth, assumptions. It was all there in the silence that came first, the kind of silence that isn't about the absence of sound, but about the presence of expectation. Charles Whitmore, a man used to contracts and negotiations, was not accustomed to being surprised. His life was managed, scheduled, protected. Yet standing before him was a boy who had nothing to gain from being there, offering him something he hadn't even realized was missing. His wallet. His trust. His perspective. At first, there was skepticism. A lifetime of privilege had taught Charles to be cautious. To question motives. To expect some angle, some ask. He had learned that nothing came free, and no one gave without expecting something in return. But Jalen didn't ask for anything. He didn't bargain. He just returned what wasn't his, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That simplicity, that sincerity, began to chip away at Charles's doubt. As they spoke, Charles asked questions. Not to interrogate, but to understand. Where had the wallet been found? Why return it? Why walk all this way? Each answer Jalen gave was wrapped in honesty. Not boastful. Not rehearsed. Just the truth, shaped by the values his mother had sewn into him like invisible threads. Do right, even when no one's looking. Especially then. Charles listened, really listened, something he hadn't done with sincerity in a long time. In his world, listening was often a performance. But this was different. Here was a boy whose very presence challenged the unspoken rules of his gated world. A boy who didn't come from money or power, yet carried a kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. Jalen didn't speak of hardship in a way that sought pity. He wasn't trying to impress. But in the space between his words, Charles could sense the quiet weight of responsibility, the kind that came from growing up too fast, carrying burdens too big for small shoulders. There was no bitterness in Jalen's voice, only a kind of wisdom that life had carved into him. What struck Charles most wasn't the return of the wallet. It was the fact that Jalen had made the choice to act with integrity, even when it cost him time, safety, and comfort. That kind of decision wasn't common in any neighborhood. It was rare. And it demanded respect. As the conversation deepened, Charles began to reflect, not just on the boy standing in front of him, but on himself. He realized how far removed he had become from people who lived outside his circle. How insulated his life had become. Success had built walls, and inside those walls, assumptions had taken root. Assumptions about what people were like based on where they lived, how they dressed, or the color of their skin. But Jalen shattered those assumptions, not with confrontation, but with character. The wallet became a symbol of something far greater than a lost item. It became a bridge between two vastly different lives. It exposed the gaps that money couldn't fill and reminded Charles of values that had long been buried beneath ambition and comfort. It challenged him to reconsider the lens through which he viewed the world. And then, almost without meaning to, Charles asked Jalen what he wanted to be. It was a simple question, but one that carried weight. For Charles, it had once been a matter of choosing between paths of advantage. For Jalen, it meant dreaming in a world that rarely made space for kids like him. Jalen's answer wasn't wrapped in fantasy. It was practical, hopeful, grounded. He wanted to help people. He wanted to build things that lasted. Maybe be an engineer. Maybe a teacher. Something real. Something useful. Something good. That answer lingered in Charles's mind long after the conversation ended. In Jalen, Charles saw more than a boy with manners and morals. He saw potential. Unshaped by privilege, but refined by resilience. The kind of potential that deserved opportunity, not charity. Investment, not sympathy. By the end of their talk, the gap between them felt smaller. Not gone, but bridged by understanding. It was not a moment built for headlines or fanfare, but one of those quiet shifts that change people. A boy had walked miles to return a stranger's wallet, and in doing so, delivered something far more valuable, perspective. For Charles, the encounter marked the beginning of something unexpected. A reevaluation of what success meant. A reminder of what integrity looked like. And a realization that sometimes the people with the least material wealth carry the richest lessons. In the space of a single conversation, two very different lives intersected, not by accident, but by choice. One chose to act with honor. The other chose to listen and be changed. And from that moment forward, neither would be the same. The story could have ended with a handshake and a thank you, two people parting ways, one with his wallet returned, the other with a clear conscience. But some moments refuse to be ordinary. They plant roots. They grow. And they leave behind more than memories. They leave behind transformation. What began as a simple act of honesty became a catalyst for something greater. Charles Whitmore was not the kind of man who acted on impulse, yet something in him had shifted. The guarded compartments of his heart, fortified over years of profit margins, legal battles, and private boardrooms, had cracked open in the presence of a boy who should have been invisible but wasn't. In the days that followed their meeting, Charles found himself thinking less about the wallet and more about the boy. About how Jalen had spoken not just with clarity but with purpose. About how he had walked alone, not seeking attention, but justice. There was no anger in his voice, no trace of manipulation, only the quiet strength of someone raised to do right in a world that often rewarded wrong. Charles had built his empire by recognizing value before others did. In Jalen, he saw value others might overlook, a mind sharp enough to question the world and a heart steady enough to still believe in it. That rare combination stayed with him, pressing on his conscience and pulling at his sense of duty. He began making calls, not out of pity, but from responsibility. He reached out to school administrators, scholarship committees, local nonprofits. Not to ask what they could do for Jalen, but to find out how he could help open doors that had long been closed to boys like him. The process wasn't fast or flashy, but it was deliberate. And it was personal. Charles didn't want to give Jalen a gift that faded. He wanted to give him a path that endured. So he created a scholarship in Jalen's name, not just for him, but for others like him. The kind of young people who walked through the world with honesty and hope, even when both came at a cost. The scholarship wasn't publicized. It wasn't designed to boost his company's image. It was a quiet rebellion against the system that too often let promise slip through the cracks. For Jalen, the opportunity felt surreal. One act of decency had become a turning point. The future he had only dared to imagine was now within reach. College, which once seemed distant and uncertain, had become a real and achievable goal. More than that, he no longer felt invisible. But the true gift was deeper than tuition or test scores. It was the message embedded within it, that who he was mattered. That character could open doors wealth couldn't. That one choice, made without expecting anything in return, could rewrite not just his future, but the futures of others too. Jalen continued to grow, not just academically, but as a leader in his community. He mentored other students, shared his story in small classrooms and large auditoriums. He never told it with grandeur. He told it with gratitude. Not for the scholarship, but for the reminder that doing the right thing still had weight. And Charles changed too. The man who once lived behind security gates and business meetings found himself more involved, more present. He didn't just invest in programs, he invested time. He visited schools, listened to teachers, spoke to students. He used his influence not just to accumulate, but to elevate. The boy who returned his wallet had returned something else as well, a sense of responsibility that extended beyond spreadsheets. Their lives remained different in many ways, but a thread now connected them. Not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect. One had given a chance. The other had given a reason to believe it was worth giving. The community took notice, not because of headlines, but because of the ripple effect. Other kids saw Jalen and believed their actions mattered too. Other leaders saw Charles and remembered that power could be used to uplift instead of protect. This was not a story about charity. It was a story about justice, about what can happen when the powerful choose to listen, and when the unseen choose to lead with integrity. It was a story of reciprocity, of how the smallest acts sometimes carry the greatest weight. And in a world that often tells black boys they are threats before they are seen as thinkers, leaders, sons, or students, Jalen's journey stood as proof that truth still has power. That courage is not always loud. That being raised right can matter just as much as being born rich. In the end, a man found his wallet. A boy found his voice. And together, they found something neither had expected, the ability to change the course of more than just a single afternoon, but of an entire life, and many more to come. Thank you for joining us on this inspiring journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that celebrate hope, courage, and the strength of the human spirit. Remember, every act of kindness has the power to change a life, maybe even yours. Until next time, stay soulful and keep believing in the good. This is Soulful Stories, where every story matters.